Hello, and welcome to World Bank Live. I'm Raka Banerjee from the World Bank's Development Data Group, and today we're talking about data, how the data landscape has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, what this means for the most vulnerable among us, and the role that data will play in a resilient recovery, in helping us to build back better. There's been an explosion of data in recent years. New sources of data like mobile phones, electronic transactions, and satellites mean that we can collect data far more quickly and with much richer detail and at a much larger scale than ever before. At the same time, there are also huge inequalities in data, what we sometimes call data deprivation, meaning that many countries don't have the basic information that they need to effectively support their citizens. During this time of COVID-19, it's ever more critical for governments to have accurate, timely information to respond to the pandemic. So what I'm wondering is, to what extent is the pandemic exacerbating the already existing data divides in our world, and what can we do about it? So to give us some clarity on all this, I'm very happy to welcome the World Bank's Director for Development Data, Haishan Fu. Hi, Haishan.
Hi, Raka.
So nice to have you.
It's always a pleasure to talk about data with you.
So Haishan, can you start us off by just giving us some context on why is it so important for governments to have access to good data, especially now as we're facing this unprecedented global crisis?
You know, if there's one silver lining of what we're experiencing now, is that this pandemic happened when much of the world has been digitized and datafied. So everything we do are based on data, and everything we do actually generate data. So the notion that data are productive asset that powers much of the growth of private sector, and data are a strategic shared asset for public sector to increasingly invest and make a better use of, has taken hold. So there's no denial. Data is going to be an integral part of our resilient response to the COVID pandemic. When talking about data, not to simplify too much, but I do see that we need data to do three things. We do need data to help us monitor the trend, the disruption, the recovery, the progress. We also need data that allow us to make strategic prioritization, to design specific interventions, and also to assess how effective those policy measures are. And at the same time, we also need data that allow us to do localized and individual targeting so that we can really reach those people who are most in need. This meant the kind of data we urgently need to direct our real-time actions are increasingly expanding in scope and also becoming deeper in the granularity. At the same time, also become more private and personal. So this is why it's really important that we come together to deal with the cascading disruptions and impacts of this pandemic by making both public and private sector data work to guide us through this crisis towards recovery and reconstruction. All hands on deck.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to pick up on that. So you mentioned public sector data and private sector data. Can you just say a little bit more about, define what is public sector data, what is private sector data, what's happening there, what are the benefits, what are the challenges?
Sure. For someone who has been working in data, conventionally, development data have been predominantly coming from the public sector. Government statistical agencies have the core function to provide data through civil registration, censuses, surveys, and administrative systems in order to provide the kind of essential information to guide effective public administration, decision for resources allocation, and delivery of services. And at the same time, those are also the basic information that to inform public discourse and civic engagement and research that help shape up our development thinking and policy making. Development data as produced by the public sector have been designed to be comprehensive, to be representative, so that we can ensure that all people have the opportunity to be recognized and to participate in societies, and all the sectors will be guided by the right information. At the same time, we also know this is where, because of the public goods nature, as well as the political economy often comes around development data, we have widespread underinvestment in public sector data. This is also why, despite the importance we see for many low-income countries, there's a data deprivation because we're still missing those foundational data. I call them foundational data, especially in contrast to the wide-ranging new type of data we're trying to deal with. You have pointed to that generated by private sector through their digitized business platforms and the smart phone applications and so on and so forth. And those are the data. They're big. They're always there, so they're real time. And at the same time, they also have their limitations. While they can help us target individual and localized actions, they also suffer from the limitations of not always accessible. They can be biased and not always representative. At the same time, could also suffer from human biases in the design of algorithms. And also the issue of privacy and confidentiality and rights are also very much part of this whole space. So with that, we need to really fully recognize the limitations and potentials, and not being trapped by the fear of the risk, but rather introduce the right governance and the right approaches in order for us to tap into the potential of this data. This is also why, to illustrate both the private sector and public sector data really help us in this crisis. By relying on what can be generated from the government data systems, the bank has been able to work with 35 other international organizations to put out a report on how the COVID-19 is changing the world, with a set of statistical facts to help us to understand the cascading, wide-ranging impact from poverty to education to health to transportation, so on and so forth. It's really because we have been investing in the public data, therefore we can do that. But at the same time, we also need more. And this is also where the private sector data come in to help us. For example, my colleague Sam, by working with his collaborators, have been able to use data shared by Cubic to look at how the poor people are responding to the lockdowns, and how, because of their circumstances, have not been able to observe the lockdowns and also being exposed to higher risk. So this is where the public sector and private sector data come together to help us.
That's so fascinating. I mean, basically, I'm hearing there's the public sector, private sector, they each have their limitations, but it seems that bringing them together in some way, especially during this time of COVID-19, through data integration, is where the real potential is, where there really is like scope for overcoming the challenges that we're facing right now. So the Cubic example is so interesting, seeing that poor neighborhoods are less able to comply with the lockdown and thus, facing greater risk. I wonder, do you have other examples of the value of data integration, of bringing together the public sector and the private sector in terms of data sources?
Sure. Indeed, I think in this day and age, public sector data and private sector data are really complementing each other. And it's often in its integration that we can gain novel insights and further spur innovations. You asked me this, that I'm very happy. Just a few days ago, I attended a webinar offered by Harvard professor Raj Shetty. With his collaborator, they're able to build a real-time economic tracker by using data from several private sectors, private companies, in order to help us gauge how economic well-beings and employment and consumption patterns are changing. Therefore, to see whether the COVID stabilization policies have any adverse effect, therefore we can introduce mitigation measures. By using transaction data from those private companies, they're able to look at the daily indicators of how consumptions and jobs are changing, in order to look at how the effects are really varying by income groups, by industries, and so on and so forth. So they do so by zip code level. This is really addressing the issue that normally the microeconomic indicators are based on surveys, business or household, and they're often done with a time lag, and also does not allow a detailed disaggregation. So by using those private sector data, they were able to really get more detailed real-time information to help us understand, for example, how jobs by the low-income people are really suffering more. Is because of the rich people are spending less under the lockdown, because their jobs in those affluent sectors are being severely affected, or how the stimulate packages are really helping people among the lower tiers of the income spectrum, that being able to recover to some extent of the loss that they're suffering. So those are the data that really helping to inform us on a real-time basis. And another example, given that we're really talking about how the COVID is having this cascading impact and really pushing more people back into extreme poverties, we need to continue to monitor how agricultural productivity is being affected. And this is where, again, by working with the private sector data, and using the surveys that our team, the Living Standard and Measurement Study surveys, have been able to generate to calibrate the remote sensing data, geospatial data that's available, have been used by partners such as Atlas AI to estimate the crop yield of smallholder farmers, and to estimate the agricultural productivity and the implications for poverty are really come to place. Because we're able to use the survey data, which is geocoded, to calibrate the remote sensing data, we're able to say that without such a calibration, the geospatial remote sensing data could actually overestimate the crop yields by almost a 10 per hectare. This is really doubling what the real picture is. So, but by this collaboration, by this such integration of survey data with the remote sensing data, we're able to help Atlas AI to improve their modeling, improve their application of machine learning to introduce more precisions of such real-time information. And at the same time, that it also allows us to further evolve the surveys. So if remote sensing data indeed will be the new answer for understanding agricultural productivity, then the survey instrument could be evolved to measure other issues that we currently have not had the right measurement and right data for. Therefore, we can really target the right interventions for poverty reduction.
That's such an amazing example.
No, all I'm saying is that we'll just have to find such transformational new innovations and be able to identify where we can scale them so that we can get a real impact.
Yeah, that's such an amazing example of the Living Standards Measurement Study surveys combined with the Atlas AI satellite imagery. I mean, what I'm hearing is if the satellite imagery alone is overestimating by 1 ton per hectare, in that case, governments are going to be vastly overestimating how much food their citizens have access to, right? So in terms of food security, in terms of making sure that people have food on the table, especially during a crisis, this kind of work is critical. I just want to take a moment to welcome everyone who's just joining us to World Bank Live. I'm Raka Banerjee with the World Bank, and this morning I'm joined by Haishan Fu, the bank's Director for Development Data. a warm welcome for everyone who is tuning in around the world. So, Haishan, just picking up where we left off, it sounds like just from all these examples, using credit card transactions, using satellite imagery, and then combining it with, public sector data, it sounds like there's so much potential for new insights bringing these types of data sources together. But I want to turn to some of the ethical dilemmas, and you and I have talked about this when it comes to private sector data. And you mentioned earlier as well, there are a lot of concerns about data privacy, for example. How is the data being collected? How is it being used? Do the individuals concerned have any rights around what's being done with their data? So can you just tell me your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you. This whole COVID crisis pandemic has really laid bare many of the deep issues that we really need to address collectively and urgently, especially in terms of how data that really containing private information that could be responsibly shared and used to offer the right insight, while inspiring trust and providing us the real insight for targeted, impactful interventions. This conversation actually reminded me, just recently, the CEO of the Development Bank of Singapore put out a provocative blog. It's about how collective action trumps privacy rights in a pandemic. He shared the experience of the Development Bank when they discovered the first patient, how quickly they were able to use data from meeting schedules through Office 365, the door and turnstile tab records, Wi-Fi connectivity record, and so on and so forth, to track the interactions this patient zero has with their other employees, and identify the different tiers of interaction, the right quarantine approaches or observations. They need to really help gauge how the disease is spreading. Subsequently, they also did an experiment by relying on the human phone trace, code trace, to see how, based on people's own reporting, that such a tracing could be done. And the result turns out to be much less effective. So the question is that if such private data in such a crisis time could serve the broader well-being of the group, could we use them? Well, really bearing in mind the need to protect confidentiality and the right of those individuals. So his question is that how we balance this and how we also make sure such very valuable data could be used to address other kind of crises, such as climate change, while individual actions and individual traces of what have been done could inform us how we can design the right approaches and policies. So this is not an issue that we can settle, or a debate we can settle right now. But what I want to stress is the urgency with which we need to come together collectively, so that we have the right governance to help us manage the risk while tapping into the huge potential of such data. This is also a question embedded in a bigger issue. Here, I really want to thank Rockefeller Foundation for having been leading a discussion among the thought leaders in how AI, which data is very much a part and parcel of that, could help us to move towards higher social good and higher social purposes instead of dystopia. Well, we can use this technology to enrich a human society, but the risk is really real, and the risk is large, but we need to come together. And they actually is suggesting that there should be a Bretton Woods type of governance institution to allow us, either it's a rule-based or outcome-based approach, to introduce a framework to guide us. And indeed, I believe, as I also advocated last year at our Data Day, we really need a political process to bring the public sector and private sector together to address some of these very deep issues that we have yet to come to terms with.
Yeah, it's just so complex. And hearing you talk about the example from the Development Bank of Singapore, I don't think there's an easy answer to, when can we tap these very private records that, are quite personal, but in the interest of, saving lives. It's I definitely see your call for a Bretton Woods type, some kind of international coming together to deal with these issues of governance. I want to turn a little to the challenges that are facing public sector data. So, you mentioned earlier the issue of data deprivation. Countries lack the basic data that they need in order to allocate resources and support their citizens. And I'm sure that with the pandemic, the situation is getting worse, especially in low-income countries. So can you speak a little to just the inequalities in the world of development data?
Yeah, I think this COVID pandemic has been widening the gulf in global data inequality across the world. The bank has been working very closely with UN Statistics Division and the UN regional commissions to do a pulse surveys among all the national statistical offices to understand how their operations have been disrupted, what are the challenges, and what are the coping measures, and what kind of support they need. And really, we see that those countries, low income and lower middle income countries, where they have the less resources, where their systems or data infrastructure has been less digitized, are suffering the most. Out of the 122 countries who participated in the survey, we see 9 out of 10 low-income or lower-income countries see the pandemic blunt their ability to fulfill international reporting requirement against only one to two in the high-income countries. The same thing happened with their ability to produce monthly or quarterly critical economic indicators such as CPI and national account and so on and so forth.
The consumer price index.
Excuse me.
I was just saying CPI. People probably don't know the acronym.
Oh yeah, consumer price index. Those are very critical economic indicators to guide government policies. So this is where we see the real challenge. But at the same time, I also need to give credit to many of the national statistical offices, really working very hard to overcome the lockdown restrictions and pursue more innovative approaches. For example, in Ghana, in Denmark, they have been able to connect with private phone companies to use code detail record to generate new experimental indicators on population mobility, to use credit card transaction data both in Denmark or in other countries to gauge the changes in consumption, so on and so forth. And at the same time, they're also embracing the role from evolving from just producing statistics to doing more analytics and to provide more real-time insight to inform the policymakers. So there's a real challenge, but we as international development partners need to be prepared to support them. And here we need to recognize the issue is that at the same time, on the private sector data use and accessibility, we have a real market failure because not all because those data are generated through the regular business processes. Not all the companies understand how this data could be used for development purposes and in what way. And at the same time, there's no real internationally agreed standard for data sharing and licensing and other data privacy protection measures. Therefore, the cost of sharing those data or accessing those private sector data has been high, and the demand for them are very disaggregated. And at the same time, on the government side, public sector side, as we discussed earlier, there's just not enough investment in both the digital infrastructure as well as the need to modernize their skills for data analytics to tap into those alternative data sources, be it from smartphone applications or from remote sensing or geospatial. So there's really this disconnect that we need to really work to address.
Right. Yeah, the statistic of 9 out of 10 NSOs, and especially those in low-income countries, suffering and not being able to collect the basic data because of the crisis. It really points to the constraints that they're facing. For anyone who joined in the last few minutes, welcome. I'm Raka Banerjee. This is World Bank Live. I'm here with Haishan Fu, the bank's Director for Development Data, and she's talking to us about how COVID-19 has impacted data collection and what it means for the response and recovery efforts. If you've missed the first part of the program, you'll be able to watch it back in a few hours at live.worldbank.org. So turning back to you, Haishan, it sounds like there's so much potential in terms of bringing together public and private sector data, but there's also these challenges, the capacity constraints on the public sector side, the ethical concerns on the private sector side. So can you speak a little bit more to what the bank is doing to help? You already talked about the survey, the report, but what is the bank doing to support these countries?
Yeah, bank is really stepping up along several fronts. On one hand, given face-to-face data collection has come to a halt, but there's such an urgent need for the government to understand the different social economic impact of the COVID. We have been working with almost 100 countries to introduce phone surveys in order to support them to collect the information to address issues such as job loss, consumption, and other social economic impact on households. There's huge demand for such data, and we're very happy that by working across the bank, we were able to produce quickly the template questionnaire, the guideline, and working through our country office to work with national statistical offices and ministries to introduce those surveys and to get the information as quickly as possible. And at the same time, we're also working on, I keep on saying we need to pursue both the foundational and the frontier, meaning we need to support both the public sector, but also engage with the private sector. We're also, during the crisis, to continue to focus on expanding our development data partnership, which is the first large-scale, scalable partnership program to allow development agencies to work with private sector, private companies through standard legal agreement, through centralized IT platform, and the proper security measures to ensure that those data could be used to generate insight for our operations, which will directly benefit our client countries. Just over the past couple of months, we have expanded this partnership to 24 private companies. Some of the data have been used for over 100 research and technical assistant projects. So that's another area that we want to continue to expand and also to help through this experience to inform how the broader community could come together to make sure that we have the right governance and right approach to access those data and for bigger impact. And at the same time, a bank is also playing its role as the intellectual leader in the development space by dedicating our 2021 World Development Report on data, development data, better data for better lives. And this is where we're going to address some of the issues we just touched upon today, and how the public sector need to be further supported to improve the kind of core foundational data they can generate, how the private sector data through the right governance and right economic policies could be used for social good. And I'm really hoping that this report will help us define a new global data agenda, and also to influence how major international development partners such as the World Bank would pursue our program to support this. This also meant bank need to strengthen our own governance on data and also invest more in data.
Yeah, I'm so excited to read the report next year on better data for better lives. And I was so impressed with the phone survey, how quickly the bank was able to work to get those surveys on the ground in 100 countries, because otherwise, with the face-to-face data collection shut down, there's no way to get information about what's actually happening to people during this crisis. We're nearly out of time, but I wanted to ask you a sort of big picture question as we close. When it comes to our efforts here at the bank and around the world to support countries working towards a resilient recovery from COVID-19, what is the role that data will play in that ambition? Sort of, what's your dream for the future of development data?
Data is an integral part of our resilient response. Data is the best bet to ensure that no one will be left behind. We really need to be guided by data through this crisis towards recovery and reconstruction. I'm passionate about data. I hope all of you will join this to make sure both public and private sector data will be used for development.
Haishan, thank you so much for being with us today. It was so nice talking with you about all of this. Haishan Fu is the World Bank Group's Director for Development Data, joining us today on World Bank Live from her home in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much, Haishan.
Thank you.
A huge thanks to all of you who tuned in. If you joined us later in the program, you can watch back the complete program later today for free at live.worldbank.org. And while you're there, take a look at all of our lineup of lots of upcoming shows on World Bank Live. In the meantime, if you're interested in learning more about how COVID-19 is impacting global development, join me and my colleague Paul Blake on the Development Podcast from the World Bank. It's on Apple, Spotify, all the major podcast platforms. I'm Raka Banerjee. This is World Bank Live. Until next time, goodbye.